Okay, it's 9:30, so I think we will start off calling the annual meeting to order. We'll do the annual meeting for 2021 prior to reconvening at the board meeting. I want to remind everybody that the meetings are being recorded, and also if you are not a speaker, to please mute your phone so that we can uh, keep the background noise down to a minimum. Okay, so for that, I've been also told that now we're going to start taking a roll call. So let's. I guess I'll go ahead and do that. My daughter-in-law is a teacher in the public school system, so I think she taught me how to do that. And I'll probably still get it wrong. So Senator Brewster.
Here.
Okay. Austin Davis. I know that Austin's not going to be able to make it to this meeting. Jerry Delon.
Morning, Jeff.
Morning. Jessica Laval.
Here.
Okay. Jen Liptak.
Here.
Ann O'Gorick.
Here.
Stephanie Turman.
Here.
Lori Mzgorski. Lori. Thought I saw you. Oh, yeah. You're on mute. Okay. I see you. Okay. Thanks. John Tagg.
Here.
Michelle Zemanek.
Present.
Okay. Did I miss anybody?
Jeff, are you
Okay.
able to hear me?
Now I can hear you. Yeah, you were on mute
Okay,
before.
Okay, if they could make note of that, this is the line I'm calling in so they don't mute me out when I want to speak. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Jeff, I guess you're in charge of that. Okay, so with that, we'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. And, well, we haven't really been able to do that, right, because we're not there. So we'll go into a moment of silence for those who we've lost to the COVID virus for these past 10 months. Okay, thank you. And with that, I'd like to call on Stephanie Turman, who chaired the nominating committee, to provide her report on the nominating committee. Stephanie, you're on.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me? I'm having
Yes, there's a bit of an echo.
Yeah, there's a lot of echo. Okay, the slate of officers that has been recommended by the nominating committee for elections for calendar year 2021 is as follows. Chair, Jeffrey Lepwin. Vice Chair, Jennifer Liptak. Secretary, Senator James Brewster, and Treasurer, Ann O'Gorick. In addition to these officers, the nominating committee is recommending elections for the following staff members: Peter Shank as Assistant Treasurer, Mike Cetra, Diane Williamson, Julie Leisener, Rebecca Jennick, and Catherine Lucas as Assistant Secretary.
Thank you, Stephanie. Are there any other nominations from the floor? Okay, then with that, may I have a motion to approve the election?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. I do want to take a moment to deeply thank the board for the confidence in my service and reelecting me for another year as chair, and the rest of the team. It's really a pleasure working with everybody on this board, and really a pleasure being engaged in this very important work of the Port Authority. So I really think it's something I really enjoy, and I thank everybody for that confidence. Okay, with that, unless there is any other business, we will stand adjourned, and we will go into the regular meeting for January 29th, regular board meeting. And with first order of business is for approval of minutes. Senator Brewster, can I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Jerry, could you second that? Don't hear Jerry. Okay. Jessica, could you second that?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, any opposed? All right, those are approved. That's both for the regular meeting of November 20th, 2020 and the December 23rd, 2020 special meeting. And with that, I'll ask our chief executive to come over and give her report.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, and members of the public joining us today for our first board meeting of 2021. Belated but Happy New Year. May I please have a moment of silence for the following former employees who have passed since November. Operators Joseph Harmon, Clark Jordan, Robert Schwartzer, John Dunlap, Stanley Paul, Anthony Scarvis, Paul Sittler, Vincent Regano, Richard Paul, Julius Denson, David Todd, Kenneth Johns, Ralph Graceler Sr., John Deckret, Charles Watson, and Jerome Gisler. Director of Road Operations Richard Wojnar, Crew Leader James Chebatoris, Maintenance Person Ronald Davis, Off-Board Fare Collector Ira Levy, Laborer Robert Little Jr., Secretaries Nancy Carter and Barbara Zulewicz, Repairman Norman Shanor, Scheduler Daniel Nee, Woodworker Lawrence Best, and Dominic Rose and Charles Tallarico. We also, of course, have lost 3 members of our active family in the past few months to COVID. These are operators Patrick Hazlitt and Marlon Lucas, and Andrew McNeil, who had been an operator for several years before he transitioned over to being an off-board fare collector. On behalf of the board and everyone who works here at Port Authority, I extend my strongest condolences, my heartfelt wishes toward peace for your families, and let us remember that COVID is real and it's impacting our work families. These people are missed here at work, as we know they are missed at home. Thank you. So this being our first meeting of the year, I wanted to take a look back to 2020, as painful as that may be. As you'll hear in a summary of our annual service report from Mr. Tague, 2020 was a devastating year for public transit, locally and nationally. In 2019, we provided 64 million trips. In 2020 calendar year, just 29 million. It's about a 55% decline. And remember that the first 2.5 months of 2020 were at strong ridership levels. Overall revenue was down by nearly 56 million. If people aren't riding, we're not getting fare revenue. Similarly, when we put caps on capacity for safety on the buses, we cannot ride more folks. It means we're not getting that fare revenue. We remain extremely grateful to the federal government for the first CARES Act, which passed in March of 2020. And we're looking forward to the December 2020 second round COVID-related funding to come to town. I don't want to pretend that we're through the pandemic. We all know that we're not, but I do want to take a deep breath and let our team know how proud I am for getting us through a period in history that we don't even have adjectives for. We went home for a few weeks in March, and here we are, still back living at home, still living life differently, not getting together for christenings, not coming together at wakes and being able to share with our families the support that's out there. And through all of this, at least 90% of Port Authority employees have been showing up every day to drive, to maintain, to clean, to monitor, and to support. And for the people who've been able to work from home, this has been vital in keeping our numbers down, and they are providing this back support that means the other 90% can get their jobs done. So thank you to this team for hanging in there together, and we look forward to better days to come. And 2020 was the year that things broke. I often say that COVID didn't break things, it showed us what was already broken. So let's make 2021 the year that we can pick up the pieces and, to quote the new administration, build back better. To build on this foundation that we've started. I'm not going to Harrisburg in person, but we have been working very closely virtually with our elected leaders, both in Harrisburg and Washington, D.C. In Harrisburg specifically, we're focused on what kind of funding replaces Act 89. This is, of course, our capital funding, which will sunset within the next few years. We also promote our agenda, not just locally, but for the Commonwealth as a whole with our representatives in D.C., and we're looking forward to being face-to-face with these legislators so we can get that support to bring money and investment back home to Allegheny County. Incoming Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has already set the wheels in motion, telling Congress this week how the DOT, Department of Transportation, can play a central role in helping the economy recover from coronavirus, and I couldn't agree more. From shovel-ready projects like a Panhandle Bridge improvement to getting more people connected to their jobs through reliable public transportation, we are what connects this community so our economy can keep moving forward. Greater investment in transit can create jobs, will create jobs, contribute to better health outcomes, improve safety, access, and mobility, and help fight climate change. I'm looking forward to working with our new secretary soon. Public transit will undergird Western Pennsylvania's recovery. Locally, we've already made getting around a little bit easier. Our mobile ticketing pilot will start next week. We're very excited about this because it's contactless, but you don't even need to visit a ticket vending machine. You can pay for your ride from your smartphone and use your digital payment to board. Validators are on about 80% of our buses, and we hope to see full rollout by the end of the year. This system also allows us to extend our sales network throughout the county, because now it's on your phone. So 2020 was a heck of a year, being diplomatic. We suffered some major losses, but we made it through. There may be some more changes we'll make in 2021, but things are starting to look up, and we hope you'll come along for the ride. Unless there's any questions, Mr. Chair, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Catherine. On behalf of the board, I think I want to extend the congratulations to you and the team for all the incredible work done over this past year, and that goes to all the employees in the organization, and especially those of our frontline workers who really took the risk and continued to show up for work and make sure that the system kept moving for those who need it. It's very admirable, and we certainly appreciate it. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, thank you, Catherine. And with that, we'll go into the report of the Performance and Oversight Committee from our chair, Michelle Zemianek.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. And I agree heartily. We're still rolling along in spite of all of the challenges, and I'm truly grateful to everyone. The Performance Oversight Committee met last week via WebEx, and I have 3 resolutions for your consideration this morning. The committee first reviewed 5 procurement items and determined the bids to be in accordance with the authority's procurement policies and procedures, the price is fair and reasonable, the bidders to be responsible, and the bids responsive. The Performance Oversight Committee recommends the award of bids listed in the resolution for the total amount of approximately $35 million. My fellow members, I respectfully request the board approve this resolution.
Jen, could you make that motion?
So moved.
And Ann, could you second that?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Okay, that motion carries.
The next resolution seeks authorization to extend agreements with GAI Consultants, Inc. and SAI Consulting Engineers, Incorporated to provide the inspection and engineering services. The agreements were for an annual 4-year term through May 31st, 2021, and a total not to exceed amount of up to $11 million, with the option to extend the agreements up to 1 additional year at the authority's sole discretion. To date, the services have been completed in a satisfactory manner. Therefore, the Performance Oversight Committee recommends extending the term of the agreements 1 additional year through May 31st, 2022 to continue the completion of the services on current and future projects, with no increase in the previously authorized total not to exceed amount of the agreement. My fellow members, I respectfully request the board approve this resolution.
John, could you make that motion?
So moved.
Stephanie, could you second it?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries.
The final resolution seeks authorization for settlement of a public liability claim. It was reported that an incident involving a Port Authority bus and an employee of a tire servicing subcontractor occurred on August 4th, 2016 at the authority's Collier garage. The employee of the tire servicing subcontractor was checking the tire pressure and tread depth of a tire installed on a bus parked in the garage when the bus began to move. A personal injury claim was submitted to the authorities seeking monetary recovery for the damages allegedly sustained as a result of the accident. The parties have reached an amicable agreement to fully and finally settle the claim in the total amount of $150,000 with no admission of fault or liability by Port Authority and subject to the board's approval. The Performance Oversight Committee recommends the settlement payment in the total not to exceed amount of $150,000 to fully and finally settle this claim. My fellow members, I respectfully request the board approve this resolution.
Jessica, could you make that motion?
So moved.
Jim, could you second it?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Michelle. With that, we'll move on to the report of the Planning and Stakeholder Relations Committee from our chair, John Tague.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and fellow board members. The Planning and Stakeholders Relations Committee met last week. I have a few items for the board. First, the annual service report. Ellie Newman presented the committee with the annual service report for fiscal year 2020. Service standards are evaluated through performance metrics, including ridership, cost per ride, rider, on-time performance, crowding, equity, and Title VI analysis. As you may have expected, ridership, as Catherine indicated, dropped dramatically in FY 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Light rail ridership saw a greater decline than bus ridership. We know that light rail riders are more likely to use transit for their commute to work, whereas bus riders are more likely to be transit dependent. Overall, on-time performance saw improvements for bus and light rail service. A service standards evaluation. It should be noted that this analysis was done using pre-pandemic numbers because many of our service standards, such as minimum passenger per hour, could not be fairly evaluated due to capacity limits to allow for social distancing. When we looked at the ridership, we found 10 bus routes and weekend rail service to be low performance. Improvements are currently on hold due to the capacity restrictions that allow for social distancing. We saw an overall improvement when we look at on-time performance, however. We did find that 77 routes that do not meet the minimum standard. Many routes had rush hour crowding pre-pandemic. Currently, we are focusing on addressing crowding on a handful of routes that are having to pass riders up due to the passenger capacity limits. Title VI analysis. The Title VI analysis looks at the impact on minority and low-income riders. We did find some adverse impacts on low-income and minority riders, and we are working to address them. We found that low-income riders are being disproportionately impacted by overcrowded trips during the pandemic. We also found that minority riders are being disproportionately impacted by overcrowding during the pandemic and by out-of-service trips for the full year 2020. It is important to note that low-income riders and minority riders are not disproportionately impacted by overcrowding before the pandemic. In the full year, out-of-service disproportionate impact on minority riders was due to the shorting staffage of East Liberty Garage. All East Liberty routes are considered minority routes, hence the disproportionate impact. The November service changes were developed with these impacts in mind, and we will monitor whether these changes were successful. Service standards. The Port Authority received 46 new requests. These were evaluated and prioritized with a pool of existing requests totaling 215. Implementation of the service changes is currently on hold until we have more clarity regarding our budget. The Allegheny County Transit Council held their general meeting on January 27th on Microsoft Teams. The council was welcomed by CEO Catherine Kellerman, and John Benice presented the council with the Port Authority plan to update the Velasco Light Rail Station, which is located in Beachview on Broadway Avenue. Sorry about that noise. The council was also provided with an overview of our proposed service changes updated on funding. The next meeting is scheduled for February 24th. The Committee on Accessible Transportation, the CAT committee, did not have many regular meetings in January. Didn't have a regular meeting in January. The next quarterly meeting is scheduled for February 4th at Microsoft Teams. The CAT committee, along with the City County Task Force on Disabilities, did attend a special meeting convened by the Port Authority to present both groups with plans to make the Velasco Light Rail Station accessible. That meeting was held on January 15th. If there are no further questions, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Any questions for John? Thank you, John. Okay, with that, we'll move into the report of the Finance Committee from Ann O'Gork, the chair.
Good morning, Chair and fellow board members. The Finance Committee met on Thursday, January 21st, and I have one resolution for your consideration. Chief Financial Officer Peter Shank presented a resolution that would permit the Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer, Director of Grants and Capital Programs, and Chief Development Officer to apply for and enter into grant agreements. This resolution would apply to various federal, state, and local grants that the authority regularly applies for, as well as discretionary grants that the authority may become eligible for in calendar year 2021. Mr. Shank noted that he would report the status of grant applications in his monthly staff reports to the board. My fellow members, I respectfully request the board to approve this resolution.
Jerry, I see you're on. Could you make that that motion? Okay, Jen, can you make it?
So moved.
Michelle, would you second? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries.
Thank you. Mr. Shank then reported on the November and December 2020 financial statements. Total operating income through November was $28 million under budget. Every operating income category was below budget through the first 5 months of the fiscal year. Lower passenger revenues and access program service revenues constitute the majority of this shortfall. Total expenses for the month of November were $2.9 million under budget and $20.5 million under budget for the fiscal year. Total subsidy through November was $7.7 million above budget. Mr. Shank reported that total operating income for December was $5.6 million under budget. Passenger revenue for the month of December was $5.1 million under budget due to continued low ridership because of the pandemic. At the midpoint of fiscal year 2021, total operating income is $33.6 million below plan, with every revenue category below plan. The total income shortfall for both November and December is indirectly eligible for CARES Act reimbursement. Total expenses for December were $626,054 under budget. Employee benefits were $1.22 million over budget, primarily due to a required retroactive payment of $1.82 million to the ATU pension plan. At the midpoint for the fiscal year, total expenses are $21.1 million below budget, with every category other than salary and wages below budget. Total subsidy at the midpoint of the fiscal year is $3.06 million above budget due to a timing issue in CARES receipts versus budget in offsetting subsidy categories. From a year-over-year perspective, it was reported that total operating income is $33.6 million below last fiscal year due to the pandemic. Total expenses are $6.5 million higher than last fiscal year, due to higher wages and salaries and benefits. Total subsidy through the midpoint of the fiscal year is $14.8 million, higher than last fiscal year due to CARES funding. Mr. Shank reported that the authority ended December with approximately $128.9 million in operating reserves. Also at the meeting, Mr. Shank updated the committee on CARES Act funding. The authority has invoiced $55.8 million from the first round of CARES Act funding through September, with $85.9 million remaining. That concludes my report.
Thanks, Ann. Are there any questions or for Ann? Any comments? Okay, then with that, we'll move on to the report of the technical committee from Jem Niptak, the chair.
Hello, thank you, and good morning, board members. The Technology Committee met on Thursday, January 21st, and at that time, there were no contract or bid resolutions for presentation. However, we did have a board presentation. Jeff Devlin and Mike Vellatry, Mike, provided an update to the progress on the mobile ticketing service project. In the first phase of the project, the majority of the bus fleet now has new Masabi validators installed, with rail and incline to follow. Customers will be able to use either Port Authority's Ready to Ride app or a widely used transit app to purchase tickets for use in this touch-free mobile service. Starting next week, the first public use pilot will begin, with 400 customers using the service on bus lines. Mr. Demlin also highlighted some of the project's early positive outcomes related to data analysis, which is using historical data to infer ridership patterns for scheduling decisions. And a personal note, as chair, I'm very proud of the work the committee has done and the entire Port Authority, and I'd like to thank them for moving this project forward. It's quite an exciting project for all of us, and hopefully will continue to help provide additional access to our patrons. So, Mr. Chairman, unless there's any other questions, that concludes my report.
Are there any questions? Thank you, Jen. And I think that was a good lead-in for me to indicate that I'd like to appoint all of the, and this is under new business, appoint all of our existing committee chairs to continue to serve in that capacity for 2021, unless they have a desire not to, in which case, please let me know before the next committee meetings are to be called. And any member who's on a committee, if you want to have a new committee assignment or an additional committee assignment, please let me know before the next committee meetings. And finally, just a note for you that Mr. DeLon is not ignoring us. He has notified me that he is having a technical issue with his phone, so he's actively participating in this meeting. Thanks for letting me know, Jer. Any other new business or old business? Okay, then with that, we'll move into comments from the public, and we have one speaker today, Laura Chu Winnings from Pittsburghers for Public Transit. I see you on, Laura, so go ahead, the floor is yours. And keep in mind the time, the 3-minute time limit. Thank you.
I'm sorry, because I'm representing Pittsburghers for Public Transit, I'm the only speaker. Do I get a full 5 minutes?
No, you get 3 minutes. If you were speaking for more people who signed up, it would be 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'd like to start by, and I didn't actually hear this mentioned, but I'd like to start by welcoming the Port Authority's new Director of Diversity and Inclusion, or the decision to include her, Ms. Fonda Doucet, on behalf of Pittsburghers for Public Transit and our transit rider members. It's so important to have leadership that can be dedicated to this role as we reckon with our nation's past and seek to address the unconscious ways we perpetuate racial inequities and discrimination in planning. And it goes without saying that transit is such a major driver or barrier to equity in our communities. We hope that the intent behind the position is not only to ensure that the transit workforce is diverse and their voices are included, but to place an equity and racial justice lens on decisions that made that will affect the public. The Port Authority has taken some important steps to evaluate equity in service plannings. Where we see gaps are often still in capital decisions, for instance, on where to deploy electric buses, where to build enhanced infrastructure for faster buses or that will support more service deployment, and ensuring that better capital infrastructure doesn't lead to gentrification and displacement of the riders you are trying to serve. There's a need for conversation about equity around bus stop consolidation. And advancing equity also requires work in ensuring that those most impacted can both give voice to their concerns and have some power in decision making. On the question of access, our members at PPT, many of whom are people with disabilities, compiled and shared with you over the summer a list of recommendations for making these board meetings accessible at some minimal levels, with further recommendations on how decision-making that affects riders could be more participatory. We hope that some of those recommendations, which mirror practices that exist in sister transit agencies and other regional public bodies in Allegheny County, can be adopted by this board. Port Authority received recently another 150 to 160 million in federal relief money through the government's December stimulus. We know that President Biden is proposing an additional 20 billion in support of transit agencies in his upcoming relief packages. We've been very active in advocating for that support, and we will continue to mobilize and organize both for federal stopgap funding and a more dedicated transit funding solution in Harrisburg. We are calling again on you to use $4 to $8 million of that relief money, now totaling more than $300 million, to run an emergency fare relief program for low-income riders, in which folks who are eligible for SNAP would show their Access EBT cards to board. It would serve as a pilot to evaluate the effectiveness of a longer-term fare relief program. And more importantly, it would help folks in a desperate time access the food, healthcare, and employment they need. Riders are having to make impossible decisions between paying for transit fares and food, transit fares and prescription medication, transit fares and utility bills. Again, transportation is the single biggest cost burden for households in many parts of Allegheny County. A fare relief program would serve as a shut-off moratorium for transit, just like the evictions moratorium for housing, and just as consequential. Finally, restoring as much ridership to transit as possible during this pandemic will help bolster the argument for a dedicated state funding solution at a time when critics will argue that low ridership levels indicate that transit doesn't need the same level of support as it has received in the past. Those in the healthcare and food sectors know that this program is critical, and leaders from Adagio Health, the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, and the Food Policy Council, among others, are willing and able to be part of a working group to discuss implementation. And I'll just say a few words about the BRT project. We're supportive of the project coming to fruition and would certainly like to recognize again CEO Kellerman for reversing the original proposal to cut service frequency on the 61 and 71 bus lines and ensure that the Lifeline A, B, and C 61 buses would maintain a one-seat ride to downtown. That decision proposed other impacts, however, and I believe that many riders, particularly those in Uptown and Homewood, have not been adequately informed or given the ability to consider how their commutes on the 71 A, C, and D buses would be affected by the shortened trips. Riders in Uptown will have diminished access to the East End, and riders in the East End, including parts of Homewood and Wilkinsburg, will have diminished access to Uptown and to key employment sites, including Duquesne University and Mercy Hospital. At a minimum, the Port Authority needs to ensure that transfers should be free, so that riders who are currently using the 71 routes under this proposal who would have to transfer to access their destinations would not have both a longer and more onerous trip and a more expensive one. And to emphasize the need for free transfers as an important longer-term fare change, the recently published Move It report on transit usage across the country shows that while transit commute times in Pittsburgh are relatively low and worth celebrating, the number of transfers that riders are having to take have increased. And knowing that ridership on transit right now is in large proportion low-income and Black riders, they are the ones that are shouldering the additional costs due to transfers.
Thank you, Laura. I hate to cut you off, but we've gone way over the 3 minutes, cut you close to the 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, so with that, our next regular meeting is scheduled for February 26th. And with that, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.